the structural position of your relationships and your networks is the dominant variable in your career trajectory, especially once you've cleared the performance bar. Again, results performance gets you in the door. That's table stakes required. But once you've cleared that bar, this quality of your network and relationships and your exposure and their visibility to your work and your work approach is what makes the difference. And decades of organizational research would agree with him.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I want to start today with a scene that I bet you or someone you know has lived through in one form or another. You're sitting in a meeting or you're sitting at your desk. You get an email about a promotion and it's not you. It's somebody you know, someone whose work, if you're being honest, is solid, it's good, but maybe even a little less impressive than yours. But there they are, getting the role, the title, the increase, the office. And on the drive home or in the shower the next day, you find yourself asking the question that almost every ambitious person has asked at some point, which is, what is going on? Because of hard work, great results were really the whole game. The math wouldn't add up the way it just did. And that question is exactly what our last episode was about. I sat down with Harvey Coleman. He's the executive who developed a framework called the PI model, specifically to answer that question. Harvey spent years inside organizations and with consulting organizations, watching who got promoted, who didn't, and he wrote a book called Empower Yourself, The Organizational Game Revealed, to really pull back the curtain on the unwritten rules most of us just never got told. So if you haven't heard that conversation yet, definitely go take a listen. But whether you did or didn't, today's episode also stands on its own because what I want to do is go deeper into each element of the model, what the research says about it, and what are some actions you can take. So just briefly for context, Harvey Coleman spent many years as a civil rights activist, a senior executive, consultant, just observing who got promoted, who didn't, and trying to identify the pattern. And then he wrote this book, Empower Yourself. And one key component of that book is the PI model. And PI stands for three things. You can think of it like three slices of a pie: performance, image, and exposure. Performance is what you do, the actual work, the deliverables, the results, the things that you deliver. Image is how other people perceive you, your reputation, whether people see you as a leader or not, whether they see you as someone who has the capability to be at the next level. And exposure is who knows about you, specifically who among the people that will make the decision about your career know about you. And here's where it gets interesting. Harvey argued that in terms of what actually drives advancement, performance accounts for about 10% of that, image about 30%, and exposure 60%. So if your reaction is that can't possibly be right, that's so unfair, I get it. The percentages I don't think are meant to be precise, but there's actually a lot of directional truth behind them that is really well supported by research. And I think Harvey was trying to make a point that was impossible to ignore. So what we're going to do in the episode is we're going to take each element, so one slice of the pie at a time, talk through it, talk about the research, and then, just talk about what you can do about it. Welcome to Anelra. Have you ever thought about unlocking the full potential of yourself or the leaders in your organization? Imagine the impact of executive coaching. Ready to transform your leadership impact? Visit us at www.anelratalent.com. Anelra, coaching solutions that work. So in the PI model, performance is 10%. So what is Mr. Coleman actually saying here? He is not saying that performance doesn't matter. I think this is the place where the framework gets misunderstood the most, especially by high performers who hear performance is 10%, and it just doesn't jibe. So you just kind of check out on the whole model. But that's not what Mr. Coleman is claiming. What he's saying is performance is the price of admission, is the table stakes. As one place where I work said it, performance gets you in the door. Without it,
nothing else matters, right? But once you've cleared that bar of being a competent, contributing professional, performance doesn't do as much in differentiating you from the other people who have also cleared that bar. And if you think about it from the other side of the table for a second, imagine you are a leader choosing between three different candidates for a director role. All three of them are going to be good at their jobs because they wouldn't even be in consideration if they weren't. So at this point, you're not necessarily picking based on whose work is best because probably all of them are pretty competent. And something else that's true is that as you move up in organizations and you have broader responsibility, oftentimes the person above you doesn't fully know what you're doing, right? They don't fully know the work that you're delivering because a lot of the work is down into the organization with your team or across with your peers. So they may not even have full visibility to that work. So if they're not choosing based on the work itself and the whole body of work, what are they choosing based on? Well, they're often choosing based on who they trust, who they have to know, someone to trust them, but who they trust, who they have a feel for, who they've seen handle difficult situations or pressure well, and whose name comes up when, other leaders are saying, what do you think of so-and-so? What do they say? And that's why performance on its own often plateaus. There's a line that gets repeated in this whole conversation. You get paid on performance, you get promoted on potential. Two different currencies, two different conversations. And in a lot of organizations, they evaluate those things separately. One is performance in this job. The other is potential for the next job. And this completely resonates with me as I think about my own time in organizations. I never felt like there was a strong correlation between my performance and my rewards. There were years that I felt like I did okay, good, and I got rewarded with a promotion or a larger salary increase or bonus. And then there were years that I went really above and beyond, worked a whole lot, and didn't feel like the rewards matched it. And when you're in an organization and considering your own work, that is confusing. So I think understanding these other two slices of the pie help in understanding those organizational decisions and help you in positioning yourself better for that potential side, that promotion side, that really has something that has elements under consideration that are beyond performance. So the second slice of the pie is image. That's the 30%. This is the one that, in my experience, makes most of us the most uncomfortable because image sounds shallow. Image, in the way Mr. Coleman talked about it, is the answer to the question, what are people saying when I'm not in the room? How do people describe you when you're not in the room? Are you the person who delivers? Are you the one who's really calm in a crisis? Are you the one that can manage a room? Are you strategic? Are you a builder? When your name comes up in a conversation you're not in, especially with people that, maybe don't know you super well, how are you being described? And the key point about this is that our careers are largely decided by conversations we're not in. So what gets said is super important, especially a lot of organizations of all sizes, honestly, and definitely at the senior levels. A lot of roles aren't posted. So you're not necessarily getting to interview for that role. And even if you did, they've seen you perform, and that's going to speak more than even an interview might. So here's why I want to bring in a bit of the research too, because this concept of image relates to a psychological concept, which you've probably heard of, called impression management. And some researchers at the University of Oklahoma, Bellino and Turnley, found that there are tactics that contribute to, managers giving us higher ratings. Tactics such as, one, making sure your manager, supervisor knows what you're working on. Framing your contributions in language that connects to the broader team or broader organization's priorities. And just being visibly helpful to others, visibly helpful to colleagues. That these tactics increase the ratings managers give people, oftentimes independent of the actual underlying work. And I know to some of us that sounds like kissing up, but I want to challenge that. Because here's the thing, a lot of managers, especially in these organizations where there's a lot of work going on, it's a lot of complexity or speed, a manager can't know everything you're working on. They are busy people making lots of decisions with the information that they have. And if you don't help them see what you're doing, if you don't shape the narrative around your own work, it's going to be shaped for you. And that could be in the wrong direction, or it could just not be enough of a narrative at all. So by not intentionally making your manager aware of the things you're working on, you're kind of abdicating that responsibility to someone else. And that means that sometimes someone less qualified than you, someone that is more willing to take a risk in talking about themselves and the work of their team may get the promotion. So let me just give you a quick example that might, kind of help frame this out. So picture two engineers on the same team. Both complete the same critical project. One of them sends an email afterward that says, hey, FYI, project ABC is complete. Maybe they send it to one person. The other one sends a Slack post in the team channel that says something like, we just completed project ABC. It's going to improve our operating efficiency 20% for next year. I know a little bit about operating efficiency because my husband's an engineer. So it's going to improve our operating efficiency 20% for next year. That's a connection to larger priorities. Huge thanks to the SRE team for the pre-work, and shout out to Priya for catching that programming error when we were in testing, sharing credit with other people. That is the same work, same, people are doing it well. Both of those people are doing it well. But after that project, people are going to walk away with two different impressions of who that leader was. The second person isn't bragging. They are making their work and their work approach transparent. So one way you can think about this from an image standpoint is working transparently, working in a way that others understand the work of you and your team and understand your approach to doing that work. In doing that, you're giving your manager and other leaders a way to talk about you and a way to talk about your work. It makes you look like someone who shares credit, who is generous, confident, not insecure. And the next time your name comes up in a leadership conversation, the words that are going to be sticking with people is like, oh yeah, John completed that ABC project and it's improving our operational efficiency 20%. That's going to be somewhere in someone's mind. That is image management. It's the difference between doing great work and being known for doing great work. And some people do this naturally because they just work in a really transparent way, and some of us don't. So if we don't, we want to create strategies that help us to do that more often. And this is super important for first level executives, maybe when you get just beyond that first level manager level in particular, because as an individual contributor, and sometimes even as a first line manager, depending on your organization, you may be able to succeed based on your output alone. But the minute you cross into broader people management, director and above, your role is partly to be a brand for yourself and for your team, so others feel confident handing that work off to you. They understand you're someone they can trust, and they understand how you work. If at that level you're still heads down, results only, kind of trusting that the work will speak for itself, Mr. Coleman and I would tell you that is a recipe for getting stuck. And you don't want to get stuck if that's not where you want to be. So now we get to the third slice of the pie, which is the biggest slice, 60%, and it is exposure. And exposure is about who knows you exist, specifically who among the people that actually make the decisions about promotions, budgets, headcount, resources, who among them knows your name and has a positive feeling about you. If image is the answer to what do they say about you when you're not in the room, exposure is the answer to do they know to say anything about you at all, right? And this is the place where the research is pretty compelling. There is quite a bit of evidence that network position drives career outcomes. And it works in a different way than I think a lot of us think about it. A lot of times we say, oh, it's who you know. And there's some truth to that, but why it works is a little different than I think some of us think. So the first piece of research, I want to talk about three different pieces of research. The first is from a sociologist at Stanford named Mark Granovetter. And in the 70s, early 70s, he published a paper called The Strength of Weak Ties. And it's one of the most cited papers in social science because I think the finding is counterintuitive, but really important. What he showed is that when people get new roles or new opportunities, they overwhelmingly get them not from their closest friends, but from their acquaintances. Remember, I was saying earlier about people who maybe they don't know you well, they've just heard about you. They know you from more of a distance, and that's what he called weak ties. These are people, maybe you know them a little, but they run in a different circle. They have access to information, opportunities, networks that really don't exist inside your immediate bubble. Because your inner circle largely knows the same things that you know, right? Your acquaintances are really the bridge to new information and new ideas. They're the bridge to the opportunities you probably never would have heard of otherwise. So when people say, I just heard this in the last month, your network is your net worth, that's where the truth in that actually lives. Not in just like, oh, I'm networking with people, but in the sense that people who are slightly outside of your daily interactions, but still in your network, are the ones who can really give you a lot of unique opportunities. And I know that was true even for me in my business. Like one of my biggest first clients wasn't someone I knew well, but it was someone that someone else I knew well. And that put me into a space that I honestly had no connections to. So your weak ties from a networking standpoint are really important. That's the first piece of research. The second is from a sociologist named Ron Burt at the University of Chicago. And he is famous for a concept called structural holes. So a structural hole is like a gap between two groups of people who don't talk to each other, so you can think about this being sales and operations or marketing and IT. It's just a gap between two groups of people. And what his research showed across lots of people, lots of organizations, was that people who know how to bridge those gaps, people who can connect sales to operations, who connect marketing to IT, can connect the team in this building to a team in another building, they get promoted faster, they're rated more highly, and they earn more money. And a lot of that is because the mechanism of why that works is because they have good ideas, right? They're the only ones seeing both sides of the equation. They're seeing across that hole, that structural hole, and can kind of make the connections and make sense of things. They also have more leverage because they're the ones who are able to broker the information across these structural holes because of their relationships. So for, first level directors, first level executives, this is huge. Like this can probably do more for your career than just about anything else, is having these strong, real working relationships with people that are in spaces that aren't yours, functions that aren't yours. And so this isn't coffee chats, LinkedIn connections. This isn't, I happen to talk to you at the happy hour. This is real, substantive, I solved something with this person kind of relationship across the organization. And think about how you get those opportunities. Sometimes you broker that yourself. Sometimes you broker that through what the work is that you do. And sometimes you create that about how you go about the work. It's like, wow, if I reached out to so-and-so, that would really help in understanding this. So not waiting and just making that connection. So that's the second piece of research. The third piece of research is from a study by Siebert et al. It's in the Academy of Management Journal. And they surveyed hundreds of working professionals and tested. This is probably the strongest, I'd say, proof of this theory, the pie model. But they surveyed lots of these people and tested whether their network ties predicted career success. And they measured it objectively in salary and promotions, but they also measured it more subjectively in terms of just how satisfied people are with their careers. And they found that, yes, network position predicts career outcome. And again, the more interesting mechanism is like how. And it's similar to the research we've already discussed, but the effect ran through kind of three different channels. One is access to information, so your network gives you greater access to information. Two is access to resources. Your network, now you know what resources are available. You know how to procure them, use them, leverage them, share them with others. And then the third one is career sponsorship, which is really key. So some of you all may have heard sponsorship is different from mentorship. A mentor is someone who gives us advice, gives us ideas. We can share our challenges with them. And they're going to help us navigate that, give us ideas on how to navigate that particular challenge. A sponsor is someone who goes into rooms we're not in and advocates for us. I sat with someone on a panel one time and they said it as mentors open the door and sponsors pull you through. Sponsors are the one that spend their own political capital, their own reputation on your name. And there's some research that supports this. Sylvia Ann Hewitt is a researcher. She's done a lot of research on executive presence as well. But she also documented the sponsor effect by looking at lots of different professionals and the effect of promotions and pay. You know, the effect of sponsors on your promotions and pay is pretty significant. Big enough that in some studies, this sponsor kind of closes the gap between different levels of performance. You know, so someone with a lower level performance but great sponsorship can have, you know, equal or sometimes better results, outcomes, not from a work delivery, but a career outcomes than someone with a higher level of performance but lower sponsorship. And you can't get sponsors without exposure because sponsors can't advocate for someone they don't know and who they haven't seen do real work, you know? So it's not just exposure like, oh, I met them in the hall. No, it's that they understand your work and can actually speak to that work. And so sponsorship is the mechanism that really can pull your career forward. And I know when I look back on my career, I had, I don't know, I can think of 5, 6 key sponsors, key relationships that I later learned were a significant influence in just about every promotion I had. And I'm guessing most of you could say the same thing. You know, your performance was important, but those relationships really pulled you through. So when Mr. Coleman says exposure is 60%, what he's really saying, you know, translate through the language of the research is that the structural position of your relationships and your networks is the dominant variable in your career trajectory, especially once you've cleared the performance bar. Again, you know, results performance gets you in the door. That's table stakes required. But once you've cleared that bar, this quality of your network and relationships and your exposure and their visibility to your work and your work approach is what makes the difference. And decades of organizational research would agree with him. So in looking at the model holistically, I want to acknowledge 2 nuances to this model. One nuance I want to acknowledge is that the pie levers do not pay off equally for everyone. There's a researcher named Ibarra who's done a lot of just critical work in this area. And she has shown that women and people from underrepresented backgrounds often build networks that look great on paper, sometimes even broader than their peers' networks, but they extract less value, less career benefit from them. So same network, different return. And that's because that network can cut both ways, right? You can get seen, but depending on the environment, you can also get scrutinized in ways that the dominant group just does not, right? So that's one nuance. So when I say exposure matters, I don't want to ignore the fact that there are structural barriers in organizations because there are. But I am saying it's a real lever. And almost because the systems are often operating in uneven ways, this strategy is critical to put in place, especially around finding a sponsor who will go to bat for you. Because in that sponsorship or lack thereof is where a lot of the inequity can live and where being really intentional in our strategy, in our investment can really pay off the most. So that's one nuance. The second nuance I want to just mention is that, of course, none of this is a substitute for performance. So Mr. Coleman's 10% is sometimes misunderstood as performance doesn't matter, and that is just not true. Performance is the foundation. So without it, actually image and exposure can become a liability because being highly visible while not performing is actually worse than just being invisible. So we're not focusing on image and exposure instead of doing great work. We are focusing on them on top of doing great work because we recognize that in complex organizations with a lot going on, people aren't always aware of what we're doing, how we're doing it, so that great performance alone isn't enough, right? But great performance is required. It's just not sufficient if we're focused on promotion and advancement. Okay, so let me try to translate all of this into something you can use this week. If you want to invest in performance, and you should, it's the foundation, Focus on doing fewer things at a higher quality and making sure the things you are doing are connected to outcomes that matter to the organization, that matter to your manager, are things that the organization cares about. Because performance in a vacuum or work that we individually find important, but the organization is not seeking, doesn't get rewarded and often doesn't get valued. So find something, focus on those few high quality things, and make sure they're connected to outcomes the organization cares about, and then deliver, right? Because results get us in the door. If you want to invest in or work on image, ask yourself this question. When my name comes up in a room I'm not in, what is the one sentence I want said about me? Or you can even ask the question, what is the sentence that is being said about me? You can ask other people to kind of understand what's my current image. But then you want to think, what is the one sentence I want said about me? And how do you start moving towards that sentence? In the way you talk in meetings, in the way you lead projects, in what you say yes or no to, in the way you share your updates. All of it should be aligned with that one sentence. And if you can't answer that question about the sentence, that's a great starting point. Figure out what that one sentence is for you. And if you do know what it is, start thinking about how you can operate in a more transparent way so that others are aware of your work and aware of your work approach, right? And then third, if you want to invest in exposure, here's a simple move. Pick 3 people who are a couple levels above you or just in different functions adjacent to yours, who you don't currently have a real working relationship with. And in the next quarter, find a real reason to work with those people. Not a coffee chat, not a, hey, can I pop in and have you mentor me, but a real working artifact, a project, a problem you solve together, an update. That's really that structural Holmes move in plain English. Reaching out across to other functions, to other people, building that network of relationships, which can lead then to sponsorship. And you'll be amazed by what that can contribute to both your own ideas and your own work approach and your career trajectory. So that is PIE, Performance Image Exposure 10-30-60. Such an important framework from Mr. Coleman because it explains sometimes why our careers aren't moving the way we want them to and what we can do about it. We talked about this more in a career lens, but you can also think about this from a business lens, right? Performance image exposure. How is that either helping or hurting your business right now? That's another lens you can put on the same work. So if this episode hits something for you, share it with one other person who needs to hear it. If you want the research papers behind everything I cited today, I'm going to drop them in the show notes. And if you have a story about how PIE has played out in your career to help you or even to challenge you in different ways, I would love to hear from you. You can find me on LinkedIn, on Instagram, and TikTok as of recently at Arlene Pace Green. I really appreciate you spending your time with me, and I'll see you next time. Be well.
Thanks for listening to the Work Well, Live Well podcast. If you're ready to grow as a leader or as an organization, head to enelratalent.com. That's ENELRA talent.com to learn how we can support you. Like what you heard? Follow or review the show so you don't miss what's next.